Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I've got a fun first impressions to do for you today. This is actually the Benchmade Leuku, and I've probably had enough experiences with this knife so far on this trip that I've been lucky to bring this knife on, that I could kind of do a full review on it. But I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna keep using it some more, mostly just because I really love using it and I don't want to be done testing it yet. But this is the Benchmade Leuku. It's a fixed blade that is essentially the big brother to their Puko. And the only Puko specifically that I have is the Tops Tanimboka Puko, which is 1095 and micarta. So this is a pretty different knife, and it's elongated compared to my Puko and the Benchmade Puko. And when this came out, it was like it finally kind of made sense for me, because I wanted the Benchmade Puko, but I couldn't really justify getting another Puko kind of the same size, and it's just I should be buying other knives. Not that I should be buying any knives, but you probably know what I mean. Like it would just been a little bit repetitious in my gear lineup to have two Pukos about the same size, and it wasn't different enough to quite push me over the edge. But when this one came out, it's bigger. Bigger can be more fun, right? It's different. It's also 3V blade steel. So is the Benchmade Puko, but my other Puko is 1095, and it's a very different knife from my Tops Puko. So this one I got from River's Edge Cutlery. Huge shout out to them. If you haven't heard me mention River's Edge Cutlery before, then you have not been following me, because I buy everything that I can from them. They're fantastic, and I just really appreciate the support that they show me and what cool guys they are in the community. So I got this in one of my most recent River's Edge Cutlery orders, and I didn't start using it until I got out here. Right now it is Wednesday. I got here Monday afternoon, and when I got here Monday afternoon, I put this right on my belt with the dangler, and I've been using it as my trip fixed blade ever since. And I've done a little bit of testing in camp with some other fixed blades, but the bulk of the fixed blade type work I've done out here, processing firewood, cutting anything around camp that I need to, it's been with this knife. And the only thing I've done around camp that I haven't really used it for has just been like carving, like whittling, and I've wanted to use smaller knives for that. That's just my preference for that task and what I was trying to whittle. But this is also my first fixed blade that I've ever used with a dangler sheath. I've always had fixed blades that just have like this loop here that goes right onto your belt and is a little more stationary, and I wasn't sure how I'd feel about the dangler. I'll say for the first hour or two with it, I was a little bit weirded out by how much it was kind of like bumping up against my leg more than a typical fixed blade would. It felt a little less secure. But now that I've gotten used to it, like when I sit down with it on my belt and it can just go off to the side somewhere and just kind of be tucked more comfortably, even walking around, like I've gotten used to it, and I think I might start to, I'm kind of preferring having the dangler sheath. I get why some people, that's what they go for on fixed blades. So I'm really liking the way that this sheath is made. It's good, well-formed, well-made leather. It's got this fire steel loop here, so I intend to pretty soon get a fire steel that I can keep designated on here. My existing one is too thick of a fire steel to run through this, but I'll get one that goes on here and it'll just be designated for with this knife. I like the idea of that. I like the way the sheath is shaped. I like the way that it dangles. I like the retention on the knife. It's a good amount of retention. I've had no issues with this knife slipping out at all. Even when I'm sitting in a way where it's kind of upright, like it's been very pleasant to have on. And then I like that inside the sheath, there's this like polymer or plastic kind of lining in here. I don't know if you'll be able to see with the lighting, but there's inside of the leather, there's this like formed plastic component to it that keeps the shape perfectly. This thing isn't like overly flexing or bending or anything, and when I'm putting the knife in and out of the sheath, it just really, it like guides it in just right. It's an excellently made sheath for like a production fixed blade. I like how well done this sheath is. Now let's talk about the knife itself. So I'm amazed that this knife is still looking as good as it does, because I've been pretty brutal to it on this trip so far. Just batoning through wood like crazy for our fires, like feather sticking to get the fire started, and chopping through stuff And just I've been mean to it on hard wood, and there is zero edge deformation, none. The tip is still perfect. I've just been like jamming this into stumps and stuff in between uses when I'm in the middle of a task. It's held its edge perfectly. The finish still looks excellent. You might be able to see just like some scuffing on it, but I bet if I were to really take the time to wipe this down and clean it just right, you probably would hardly be able to tell that I've been using this like I have. And I like that in a fixed blade. I like building like patina and use wear on a knife over time, but I don't love it when the first day that I've got a knife and I cut the first couple of things, it's already like scuffed and looks nasty. Like, I want that to come with time and a lot of use, not just like using it a little bit and then it looks like, oh yeah, it's super hard used my knife. I want it to show from real extended use, and I like that this is proving that that's kind of going to be the way this finish holds up. Now, this CPM 3V, I was a little worried I was going to find that it was maybe soft or something, because I know from some friends of mine and their testing on some of Benchmade's 3V that they have found sometimes that you have to get a few edges deep on it before you get to the good stuff, or that they've overheated it, or that they haven't quite heat treated it right, or something like that. But I mean, in probably about 48 hours realistically of having this knife on my side and using it continuously for very hard materials, it's performing how I would want 3V to perform so far, and I'm really, really happy about that. The blade stock thickness on this, to me, is about perfect for what this knife is designed to be used for. This isn't a super heavy camp chopper where I'm literally using it in the place of an axe or anything like that, but it's robust enough that this thickness, it's confidence inspiring. For anything regular that I'd use a fixed blade of this size to do, it feels totally equipped to do it. The grind is excellent for it, and then also just the balance of this knife. It's lighter than I expected it to be, for sure. Before holding it, one of the first things I noticed was that it was lighter than I was anticipating it being, and the balance is very neutral. When I'm holding this knife to use it, it doesn't feel blade heavy, even though, as you can see, the blade to handle ratio, there's a lot of blade happening here, and it feels not just balanced in weight, but in its proportions and in how it's built. It feels like a well thought out, intuitive design to have in hand and to push through material. I like as well that this is kind of on the bigger end of fixed blades that I'll realistically like have on my hip out hiking or camping or something like that. Bigger than this, I start to feel like, why am I carrying so much knife? I don't need a sword on me, right? If I need a machete, that's a different tool. But this is like a good amount of blade for, I've batoned through some pretty thick logs and had no issue getting through it. And it's just, the proportions feel really just right to me, I think is what I'm trying to get at. So the steel has performed excellently. The finish has held up great. The weight of it is right where I want it to be, and the thickness and the proportions are just, they're so good. And then the ergos, I haven't really talked about yet, but they're very, very good. This handle is not something that aesthetically I'm in love with. I like the color, I'll say that, but the way that they've molded this like rubbery, polymery, I don't know what material this actually totally is, but it's like a rubbery, like dense, hardly any give, but rubbery material. The way that they've molded it looks a little too like lizardy to me. Like just the shape of these bigger cutouts here and then the kind of checkering here. I'm not in love with it, but I don't hate it either. I'm sure think this knife looked better if they put micarta scales on it that were screwed through the handle, something like that. It would look cooler to me for sure. In fact, I think I've seen some people do that with the Puko, cut these rubber handles off and then put micarta scales. Maybe eventually I'll do something like that to this, but what I'll say is functionally, the way that there's just a little bit of swell here, top and bottom, it just swells and then it comes down and then just barely seems to kind of taper a littlest bit back here. It's really neutral, but it's not so perfectly neutral that it doesn't feel, I don't know, like my Tops Puko is just like a very kind of rectangular, like almost blocky. It's chamfered, it's not like sharp in any way, but it doesn't have this swell like this does. And the way that that sets into my hand, it feels a little more confidence inspiring than a typical like Puko style knife does. Whether that's totally true to what a Puko is supposed to be, I don't know. I'm not the expert on Pukos, but I'll say that this works really, really well. If I'm choked all the way up to where that edge is for feather sticking and stuff like that, super comfortable. If I choke right to the middle of it for typical kind of more like, I don't know, rough tasks, also feels great. If I choke back to chop with it, also feels great. It's neutral enough that any grip is going to feel very, very comfortable, but in a hammer or saber grip, the way that those swells relate to my palm and where my fingers wrap around it, it just feels really, really good to me. So I quite like this knife. It might become one of my favorite like hip carry fixed blades that I have owned, period. It's just really balanced for everything I want it to be, and I like that. I like that I found something that just feels this good and this confidence inspiring and this intuitive to use, and it's in this steel. And yeah, we'll see. I'm gonna keep being real rough on it for you guys. Really, it's for me, but I'm gonna keep just being brutal to this knife and testing it, and I'm gonna use it again at camp a whole lot tonight. I'll find something maybe even more extreme to do with it, and I'll do some testing where I'll jam it into a log and do some prying, and I haven't found any limit to this knife's performance yet, and I have not been gentle with it, and I like that. I'm impressed so far. So those will be my first impressions of the Benchmade Leuku in CPM 3V, and it is very, very nice and very well made.